I'm Dan Shaw-Bell, managing partner of Workplace Intelligence, and in this series, I talk to leaders about their perspectives on hybrid work. My guest today is Amir Salihefendic, founder and CEO of Doist, a company that creates tools that simplify and organize your workday. Amir, it's great to have you here.
Then it's awesome to be here. Yeah, I'm looking forward for this.
Why did Doist originally decide to be a remote company back in 2007, and how has that impacted the company since?
Yeah, I mean, when we started this out, like it was kind of like a very niche thing. There was like a handful of companies, and like we actually started like organically because at that time, like I was in Chile, and I couldn't really hire locally in Chile. There was like almost no tech people there. So, what did I do? I kind of like started to hire globally. And then suddenly, like, we are a fully distributed company all around the world. And then we are trying to kind of like make this work. And then over like the last decade, we are basically seeing this like grow. And with COVID, it's basically like accelerated. So right now, it's probably like millions of companies that are working this way. Yeah. So it has kind of been a wild ride just seeing, this trend, like just go from like being a niche, like where you're like also like questioning, when we started this out, we questioned like, are we really sane, like because it was just so uncommon, to just work like across borders and like, yeah,
Well,
yeah.
it makes
So
sense. I mean, you had the primary use case is, when you hire and have a remote first company, you can find people and recruit them from wherever they are. And that's kind of how you got into this is you were in search for talent. And because you were remote, that wasn't required. They didn't have to fly in and interview on site to get a job. And they didn't have to, come to the office, 1, 2, 5 days a week to maintain their job. So that really expanded your talent pool and allowed you to build a business that it would have been potentially harder to do if you didn't have that in place.
I think it would have been impossible. Like, yeah, like I would have needed to relocate to a place where I could hire the people that I needed, and I didn't want to do that. Yeah, actually, like when I went to Chile, like my plan was actually to go to the Bay Area and do what all the other founders do, but then I kind of met like my wife in Chile, and that's why I stayed and kind of tried to work it out from Chile. Yeah.
Ironically,
Uh,
a lot of people have left the Bay Area because of remote work. They don't need to be there like they used to. Why do you believe that the remote first and async first is the best workplace model?
Yeah, I mean, something to note about like all of this, and I think like Chris Dixon, I'm not sure if you know who Chris Dixon is, an investor from A16 said he has like this post on like native technologies or like strong technologies and weak technologies. And basically, I think like if you were to kind of like do knowledge work from the ground up, like from the first principles, you would probably not do it like centralizing everybody in the office, like that's not something that would come very natural. So I think actually like this fully distributed way of working together and using like, internet, computers, just like, the written language, like even like, virtual calls, that's kind of the native way of collaborating on the internet. So yeah, I think actually like the old ways are kind of like the non-native, that's kind of the past. And it's kind of like also ridiculous that people actually want to go to the past instead of like embracing the future. Yeah. And then of course, like I think like remote first, like just being fully distributed is one aspect that's super critical. The other one is kind of asynchronous first. And most people still don't really know what this is or what it means. But it's basically like that. You're not like doing Zoom calls and Slack chats all day long. That you like most of your work is kind of like either deep work or you're disconnected or you're in a meeting. But like you try to keep meetings and like synchronous work to a minimum. And what we have seen like during the COVID, especially, is basically like people try to move like the office environment into the cloud, and then they try to like just replicate like meetings, and just like, and then like you feel like this fatigue. I'm not sure if you have like been like in hour longs like Zoom calls, like it's not very fun. So Yeah. So, and I think like that's basically like, the next evolution of like remote first is kind of asynchronous first. And you can see this like with some companies, like GitLab is a great example. It's like an asynchronous first company. They have about 2,000 people. They are actually going like public very soon. Um, so you can like, even like, this isn't really niche only. Like you can build very big companies that have like a ton of people and a ton of revenue, a ton of impact.
That's a
Yeah.
really
So
good point. Yeah, and
yeah,
I would add on to that. I would say, well, people who are actually going back to the office, they're just on Zoom all day anyways. So why are they even there? And are they even spending time, meeting with their colleagues and brainstorming and using an office for what it would be most beneficial to use it for?
yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I think like what we see is basically like maybe, like allocating some of the office money to like spending it like more on more fun things. So actually something that we have done for many years is kind of like retreats where we basically go to like a exotic place, maybe not exotic, like we have been to like Iceland with the whole company and Chile and like, Iceland or Spain, where you kind of have like some connections that you don't typically have with like your coworkers, and that kind of creates like memories and like experiences that really create like very strong bonds for people. So I think like that's probably what like you will still spend money, but like you will spend it very differently. Like you want spend it on some like huge office for many people. Maybe it would just like be trips or maybe even hubs, or yeah. It will be very interesting to see like how the whole thing moves. Yeah.
And you've talked about how you benefited from being able to recruit and hire from different countries. But what are the other benefits of having a fully distributed workforce, and what are some of the drawbacks?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I mean, we can start with the benefits. I mean, first to notice, like, I think it's a superpower to actually be able to hire and live and work from anywhere. And I think like it's both like great for the companies, but it's also great for people. Like you can just go in and like live in your hometown village. A lot of like Doisters do that, like where they are just there. They get a great salary. They actually have a great impact on the local community because they can help. And I'm quite excited about that aspect. Just like spreading the wealth around instead of like centralizing in like these huge cities. So that's one aspect. The second aspect is like really something that's like I think quite new. It's like asynchronous first. It's like the ability to disconnect, the ability to kind of like plan your own day as you like, because you're not like kind of stuck to like this 9 to 5 schedule. And I think especially I have 3 kids, so ability to just like take 2 hours off, and I don't feel like I'm blocking anybody or like like the whole company stops because I'm not working. That is kind of another superpower that I hope like more companies will embrace, because I think that's the ultimate freedom. And also just like asynchronous first, I think it's also like the way that you work is like it's much more focused on like deep work. I think like it's really focused on like empowering like creators, and this can be like even if you're writing, like you want to have like a headspace and like just ability to have like some focus area to write. But this also goes to design, to coding, to like thinking, strategic thinking, or whatever else like you do. So honestly, like I think like those are bigger benefits. I think like we create better work because it's more like profound, more deep. And then I think like people can also live better lives because they have more freedom. They can structure the day as they want. So like in this, like we have some crazy people that not crazy people, but like they have crazy schedules, that like they work during the night, and then they sleep during the day, and you can do that in like asynchronous first, and nobody really cares, like how you actually structure your day. Yeah. So what are like some of the like negative parts? That was another question, and honestly, I think like it requires a lot more discipline. And like something that a lot of like office managers or like founders fear is kind of like people not working enough or like slacking off. I think like the opposite is true, actually. Like people overworking because they can work all the time, and then like they don't really get the they don't disengage, and especially like mixed like with the culture we have created of like this always on, like always connected. Like I think this is like really, really bad for like people's mental health. and even like physical health, because maybe you don't go out that more, maybe you don't do as much sports as you used to. So that's something that I think like is probably going to be a backlash, especially, you know, like combined with like lockdowns, you know, where like people are stuck with their kids and like are just stuck in home or have been stuck in home for a long time. You know, I think that these will have like very severe like impacts on just like mental health of people.
It's true. Yeah, as remote work increased, more and more people working remote at least sometimes. Burnout also increased because people were working upwards of 5 to 10% more. Instead of commuting, that time was spent working. And, you know, it's very hard for people to balance their personal and professional lives because they were intertwined. And so I think that's a really, really good point. And, you know, it's a drawback, but I think that a lot more companies are saying, hey, like, we recognize this like you do. But what are you doing in the face of that? Like, are you offering programs, benefits, resources? You know, what kind of feedback have you gotten from your employees, and what are you offering them as a result?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think like being like asynchronous first helps a ton because it kind of enables people to disconnect like naturally, and then you're not like in these like, you know, hells of like Zoom calls all day long. So I think that's a really, really like important. Like if you want to embrace like fully distributed work, I think like you also need to embrace like asynchronous first. So this means like more written language, like more documentation, more like deep work instead of like these like always on communication that we use. So I think that's one aspect. The other aspect is based like you know, like in this, like we are really pro people and we are very open about like issues such as like mental health. People can take like days off, like without asking anybody. They don't need to like present anything because we just, you know, yeah, like we trust the people that like if you're going to take a day off, then like it's because you need it. Like it's not like you're stacking off or something like that.
That's really good to hear.
Yeah, so I think like also, you know, basically another thing, and I think it's like really critical for like these fully distributed companies, like trust is really a key element here. Like without trust, this doesn't really work, and it kind of goes both ways. So like just to give an example, like we don't track people, you know, like we don't really care when you work or where you work. We don't know actually if you work, and then you can actually micromanage people, like monitor people, you know, like because like smart people, they will just hate that system, you know, like you don't get like a super creative, smart person to be monitored and micromanaged. So I think like really it's about creating a trusting environment where people can kind of like take days off. You like I think also another thing that we do is kind of like we have very generous vacation policy, like 40 days off paid the year, regardless of where you live in the world. Yeah, so stuff like that. And then we also have like perks as well. People can like go to the gym or like whatever. Yeah, we have like a bunch of these as well. So honestly, like, you know, it's just about like, you know, helping people out and like acknowledging that, yeah, like this is hard. Yeah, and honestly, like for us, I think it's also maybe like the core values, like one of our core values, kind of ambition and balance. And then like it's kind of yin and yang. So like, you know, we don't want to just like be super ambitious and then like after like 10 years you have built like an amazing company, but you have like burned everything around you, you know, like then like, yeah, you're probably not going to be very happy about like that. Yeah.
Yeah, speaking about your work culture, can you describe what makes it unique and what other companies can learn from it?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, honestly, like I think like some of these like remote first companies, including this, like we have a very unique culture, um, and that's also something like that people don't really understand. It's kind of like that you can have very, very, very strong culture inside like a remote first company. You know, like culture isn't like being in an office. You know, it's kind of like the people that you hire, the people that you fire, the values that you have inside, the communication styles that you have. Yeah, so for us, I mean, some of the stuff that makes us maybe unique is kind of like, for instance, like mastery is incredibly important for us. So just to give an example, like people can take like 1 month off the year, we can just like spend time on one of their own like pet projects. where they can basically like use that to learn something new or like even contribute like to something they haven't contributed before with. So just one example, like how, you have like a core value, but then you also like implement that core value and make it like real. So it's not just something you have like, on a website, like these are our core values. Yeah, and another thing is maybe like independence. We have like found out like in a remote first company, independence is like incredibly important because you really, yeah, like you really need to have people that are kind of self-driven, self-managed because you have like different time zones. You're not really working at the same time. If you need to, get input or like be micromanaged by somebody else, then everything falls apart. So you really need to have like people that are kind of independent, can kind of just do their own thing and contribute that way. Yeah. So honestly, there's like a lot of these things that kind of like make a unique culture. And of course, like some other companies, they value some other things, like some maybe want to create like a fun environment or whatever else like you do. And then you kind of like try to structure and see like how does fun actually get implemented in like fully distributed team.
Yeah, and so many companies rely on the office to communicate their values and to kind of tangibilize their culture. But from all the leaders I've talked to, that's not quite necessary. There's all these other ways, especially using technology and communication, that you can translate, everything that you do and communicate your values so that people get it and you attract the right people and retain the right people.
That's an excellent observation then, and something like I will really deeply recommend. And it's not really us that has started this trend, but it's like having a handbook, where like you have codified like what do you actually value. Like for us, that was an amazing like exercise. And actually, we started off like I think with 14 different values, and then we kind of like at some point like asked like, can actually anybody remember what our values are? And nobody could really like, maybe you can remember like two, and then like, yeah, like, because, that isn't really like, I think like core value should really be the like a few things that you really, really care about, and everybody can maybe care about like, I don't know, like teamwork, that isn't really a core value. Like, yeah, because like, it's kind of like, yeah, like it's not really very like counter positioned or like very strong. And it may be also like something that if you like want to define these core values, like you should maybe have a core value that is kind of like also good, but it's kind of like counter position to the core value that you value.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and speaking of teamwork, how do you build team camaraderie and foster collaboration with a remote workforce?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think like it's really the same as you would do it in an office environment. It's kind of like, and of course, like at Doist, like we do crazy things. Like, whenever I tell like how we actually structure work and do work, it's kind of very different from everybody else. So, but I don't think like this is very like specific to like the remote culture. Is more like what we value at Doist. So, for instance, like for us, we work in these small squads of maybe about like max 5 people, where you basically have like a designer, a supporter, and like some devs into this, and they basically have like a project that they need to execute on. What is I think very special about our way of doing that, we call this like do system. It's kind of like the whole system is like dynamic, and every month we reassemble and assemble different teams. So this means like during the year you will work with many different people. You'll be thrown like at many different problems, and of course, like if you look at this like from like efficiency standpoint, it's not very efficient because like it will much better to just have like static, squads of people that kind of know each other and can work together and etc. But what we want to do is kind of like make people adaptable. So like you have a problem, you have a group of people you need to solve it, and then you tackle that. And then, after you have done this like for 30 times, then you kind of like learn to adapt to different situations and to different problem spaces. And this also like enables us to just like shift focus from month to month. Like we can basically like do a completely different product next month if we want to. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes you more efficient. And when you do Zoom meetings, not hopefully not the 3-hour ones that we all complain about. What are your thoughts about cameras on versus cameras off during them?
Yeah, I mean, something new is like we do very few Zoom calls or like virtual calls, and when we do that, like camera is on and people are fully focused on the meeting. And most of our meetings are kind of one-on-ones, so like you really want to build like rapport with people. Another thing is like we only do a meeting if there's an agenda. So if there's no agenda, like you don't meet people just to say hi, like if there needs to be something a bit, a reason why you're having the meeting. Because if you think about it, especially like group meetings are super expensive if you calculate the costs. So that's why I think, and not only like expensive in terms of like money, but also time and energy that people spend on it. So I think it's really, really critical that like you have a problem that is worth having a meeting about. Yeah. So I hope I throw like some tips of how we do that. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what is one thing you suggest companies do to increase the chance of successfully transitioning to remote work? Because of course, there's so many companies that are not remote first, like you, but they might decide to be in the near future, maybe the next year. What's your recommendation for how they can make that transition?
Yeah. I mean, something I think, Dan, is like, I think it's maybe harder to actually like convert than actually to start from the bottom up. Because like,
Sure.
like people usually hate change. And maybe even like something that you could do, like if you have like an office culture or like maybe even a hybrid culture, like maybe you have like Zoom calls all day long, is maybe like starting gradually to introduce like more asynchronous patterns. So for instance, like just an example, like you introduce a handbook, or you kind of abolish like 9 to 5 schedules. Like you don't evaluate people if they are working from 9 to 5. Like you find other ways to evaluate their work, and slowly I think you can kind of like move into like remote first and asynchronous first. Maybe like if you just do it like from one day to another, like it will be a huge shock for people. That is this something that I have actually never tried it, so I don't know. Like I've always like grown up in this like kind of like remote first, asynchronous first culture.
But that's a really key point that you just made. Like if you've always been full-time office 5 days a week, to go from that to full-time remote work is going to be really hard. So you need to take baby steps, maybe small behavior changes, or maybe start with one day working remote. A lot of companies are, transitioning to hybrid where for the most part, it's 3 days in the office, 2 days remote. So that creates challenges as well. Like there's no perfect model for every company. Every company has to do what makes sense for them. That's my overall conclusion after talking to leaders for the past few years, is like they're trying to figure out, what do we do? And I think that part of that is listening to the voice of the employee. What would you say to that?
I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think the like a dangerous aspect I can see is like as humans we just like the status quo, like something we are used to, and then um, and that's something I can see like with hybrid work. It's kind of like I think actually if you adopt like a hybrid style where you still have like office work and still remote first work, then you kind of have like two different worlds that are maybe not really compatible. And then you maybe have the worst of both worlds where you're not really good at office, work more, and you're not really good at like remote first. And then suddenly like, like it's just like a mess. So like, yeah, like I think you make such a good point. Like I think baby steps are needed, but I think it's also like, you need to kind of decide like what is actually the future of your company. Is it kind of like to go and be remote first and become remote first? I think like hybrid, I think it's probably the worst. Like you should not aim to be hybrid, because I think it's kind of like worst of both worlds. I mean, it's kind of like similar to like hybrid cars and like full electric cars. Like I think everybody knows that the future is kind of full electric because the systems are just so much simpler. Like if you actually go with a hybrid car, you have like the complexity of like the normal car, and then you have the complexity of the electric car, and it's kind of just like a mess. So it's the same thing. I think maybe with the remote work, it's kind of like adopting both, maybe not. So yeah, if it was me, I would rather like adopt a fully office culture and say, okay, we are office only, than like doing these hybrid structures. But I'm also very opinionated on this, and maybe like some people will kind of like figure out like also how hybrid structures can work.
How do you ensure that remote employees are accountable and aligned to your organizational goals, values, and mission?
Yeah, I mean, I think something that is true as well for like remote first is kind of like you really need to change how you evaluate people. So like in a office setting, a lot of times like what you evaluate is basically like, are people like punctual, do they kind of demonstrate that they work hard? Like maybe you don't really care about like the output they are actually doing. In a remote first setting, like you can't really see people that easily, so you can't see if they work hard or not. So you kind of like need to really change how you evaluate people. And I think like ownership as well, like independence and accountability are kind of like keystones for that.
So something that does. You mentioned trust too.
And trust. Like trust is really, I think, maybe the most critical one. So that would kind of be like that like micromanagement doesn't really work. You can't really evaluate people like vanity metrics, like let's log how many hours John works, because like how many hours somebody works doesn't really tell you much. Like it doesn't really tell you like if the work they're doing is actually good or not. So those are just like some ideas, and maybe like even like leadership style needs to change. So basically at Doist, like what we actually want is kind of functional experts that are leaders of our teams, that still do like hands-on work. And I think like some other company like Stripe is doing this as well. And the reason for this is like, if you're a manager and you don't really know what good looks like for your function, then like you can't really evaluate work, like because you can't just like see something and and maybe in an office environment this works because there's kind of like a lot of like clues that can give you some indication if somebody's like working hard or not, or like contributing or not.
Yeah, definitely. You don't want to measure how many hours someone's putting in anymore. That was fine in the old school, 9 to 5 work day, but now it's really about output. And I would argue it's about, people's relationship with their coworkers, right? And I think that's why you have your annual event where people are gathering in person, because you still see the importance of FaceTime when it comes to building trust and relationships. And what do you think the future is for remote work?
Yeah, then, I mean, like we have been very, like we started to see this as like future work like 10 years ago. And right now, like it's kind of like remote first is kind of like the present of knowledge work. Like you have millions of teams adopting this all around the world. So honestly, like I'm really positive that we're kind of like in the first phase of this, because I still don't think like a lot of the tools and processes that we have is kind of optimized for the new reality. A lot of like the tools and processes that we have is kind of optimized for either the factory era or the office era. But right now we kind of like need like these things to be optimized for like fully distributed work, where you have like all kind of culture, all kind of people working together in kind of like this cloud. And I'm very excited about that aspect, and also like our role in like creating tools for this. So
you seem to have good faith in the fact that if more and more companies become remote, your advantage is that you started off remote, and so you've had all that time to build a remote work culture and learn what works, what doesn't work. So as all these companies, especially the companies with, let's say, 20, 50, 100,000 employees, as they try and transition, it's going to be much more difficult because of the amount of people, and the amount of real estate footprints they have. Whereas you're kind of like small, nimble, and you've already learned and are willing to adopt the technology to improve your culture.
Exactly, then. And honestly, like, I think like the companies that don't really like adopt this or like embrace this, I think they will be extinct because like you will not be able to compete, because like you will not be able to hire people. And like if you can hire people, like you're competing against a pool, like global pool of people. And even like, if you see some of these like advances that we're making, I can just like take an example. I'm not sure if you know Figma, which is the tool that designers use. But it's basically like revolutionized how design is made, and it's basically like collaborative in a browser. It's kind of like a science fiction. And this is just like one aspect of this, where like the new world looks so much like different and better. And like if your team isn't embracing like Figma or like asynchronous first work, I don't think you will be able to compete as a company. Yeah. So, maybe I'm wrong. Like maybe there's something like being like, in the office, in a place. But honestly, I think like it's just like, it's very old school and outdated for the modern world. Yeah.
Well, that makes perfect sense. And thank you so much for sharing your perspectives, Amir.
Dan, thanks for having me here.